What is up? Today I'm going to be teaching you about the most influential female in the new Soviet society, Alexandra Kollontai, a significant figure in the Bolshevik Party during the Russian Revolution. So let's start out with her youth. She was raised to start political upheaval, but only to an extent. She was born Alexandra Demontovich. Her father was a former Tsarist general, and her mother was the daughter of a minor nobleman. Both of her parents had progressive political views, so this really influenced her to be able to see things from both sides, since she was obviously very influenced by the government, given her dad's position, but also by her parents' political views. She was raised in both Russia and Finland and was fluent in both languages. This ability to speak multiple languages at a young age helped her learn more later on, which eventually helped her to become a diplomat. She was anxious and rebellious growing up and inherited these ideas from her parents and her tutor, Maria Strakova. At the age of 18, she ran away to marry one of her distant cousins, incest moment, who was a struggling engineer named Vladimir Kollontai. She had her first son with him a year later. But this all changed once she got introduced to Marxism. How did she become the dope politician she was known as? Let me explain. So she studied abroad and then joined the Social Democrats in 1989 after traveling around Europe to kind of see what was going on there. She sided with the Mensheviks after the party split in 1903, but she still mixed regularly with Vladimir Lenin, Nadezhda Krupskaya, and she even had an affair with Alexander, whose last name I cannot pronounce, but I think it's pronounced Shleipkinov. And there's her then. She focused on socialist revolution and its connection to the female liberation specifically. She argued that without socialism, women were never truly going to be able to be free because a lot of their oppression came from the work and being a part of the working class. In June 1915, she left the Mensheviks and joined the Leninists. And then in April 1917, she backed Lenin's call for a Soviet revolution and was arrested during the July days. But after the October Revolution, which actually took place in November, Lenin appointed Kollontai as the Commissar of Social Welfare. Next up, we're going to be talking about the Zenot Del, aka a pioneer in women's rights. So, as Commissar of Social Welfare, she had helped reform welfare by legalizing abortion, divorce, and birth control, decriminalizing prostitution, and the legal concept of illegitimacy was also banished. This was also she was also one of the people that gave women the rights to vote, which meant that Russia, or the Soviet Union, since they weren't the same thing, was one of the first countries to grant women voting rights, something that is not commonly taught because of the socialist backgrounds of the Soviet Union. However, in the Zenot Del, she had more power to be able to do more for women, which is where a lot of her thirst to do more came from. In 1918, she passed the Family Code, which reversed the patriarchal powers. In this ruling, married women retained complete autonomy over their wages. There's no legal status of being illegitimate, and it basically made her an international pariah because everybody hated the fact that Russia was advancing women's rights. Then, in 1919, Kollontai and Inessa Armand formed the Zenot Del, a Soviet government department dedicated to the rights and needs of women, specifically women, which is honestly one of the first of its kind. Kollontai took over leadership when Armand died in 1920. So while all of this was going on, Kollontai was super sick. She had a lot of health issues throughout her life, including typhus, problems with her lungs, problems with her liver. But throughout all of this, she continued to fight for women's rights, go on speeches, and just really dedicate her life to Marxism and politics. After the Zenot Del, which had been shut down because Stalin was worried that it would kind of put like a target on their back because, they were being so progressive. So a lot of her stuff actually got taken back. But here's another part about her, which is the workers' oppositions. Factions. So in 1921, the workers' opposition pamphlet called for party members and trade unions to have the freedom to discuss policy issues. This is something that Kollontai was very passionate about and had written herself. And she was very into getting out her voice in terms of how the Soviet Union had declared that they it basically outlawed factions, and Kollontai was like, no way, you're shutting out my voice because I don't think you guys are doing enough for workers' rights. So she was very critical of the Communist Party and its growing bureaucracy and heavy-handed management of factories and workers. So that's kind of where this came from, and unfortunately it is also what ended her political career. Oh no! At the 10th Party Congress in 1922, Vladimir Lenin proposed a resolution to ban factionalism within the party, dissolving the workers' opposition. Unfortunately, this kind of is the end of Kollontai. It is not the end of everything she did, but it is the end of her overall large position in Marxist politics, because for the rest of it, they had essentially sidelined her because of her outspoken criticism. So she remained a girl boss. Problematic phrase, but honestly, I'm just going to use it to apply it to her because it's true. Let's go through everything this queen did. She worked as a Soviet diplomat and ambassador in several countries, including Norway, Sweden, and Mexico. In 1922, Kollontai was appointed as advisor to the Soviet legation in Norway. From then until her retirement for health reasons in 1945, Kollontai was effectively in exile as a diplomat because they really just did not want her opinions coming back to bite them. So she kind of dedicated herself to reading and learning and just doing the best for her country, even if they weren't doing the best for her. Her views on the status of women were marginalized and trivialized in the USSR itself after she had left, because really there was nobody there to fight for them like Kollontai had fighted for it in the first place. However, she did a ton in her position as a diplomat. As ambassador to Norway and Sweden, as a trade delegate to Mexico, as a delegate to the League of Nations, and as a negotiator of the Finno-Soviet Peace Treaty of 1940, she served the USSR with what I would regard as a great finesse. From 1946 until her death in 1952, she was an advisor to the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So even though they had essentially kicked her out of the country, they still knew that she knew what she was doing, and they wanted her back. She actually was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize twice in 1946 and 1947 for brokering the Finnish-Soviet ceasefire, which is dope. She retired in Moscow in 1945 for health reasons, where she died in 1952. So she didn't really live a long life, but boy did she live an impactful one. So now that we've covered her life, and I'm sorry I had to cram that in, but I want to focus on the feminist icon. Now, I titled this slide, She Cool, She Rocks, because she is cool, and she does rock. She was erased from history for being a socialist, despite how much she did for women's liberation, not to mention how outspoken her views on sex were. Her emphasis on the public provisions of services for women and children actually infused the key international UN Treaty on Women's Rights, which has been ratified by 187 countries, but not the US, surprisingly enough. Unfortunately, as I've said before, her policies were removed due to Stalin's paranoia of Western invasion, but they were reinstated after Natalia Baranskaya's 1969 novella about women in the workforce, which basically exposed everything Kollontai had already exposed like 40 years earlier. Women are suffering, they have no help with housework, they are having a worse mental health because of how much responsibilities they have, and all of this kind of comes back to feminism and that idea of feminism. So even though her policy ideas were removed, she really planted the seed work for something that would grow into what we now view as feminism today. After World War II, Eastern European nations hoping to mobilize women into the labor force actually implemented updated versions of her early Soviet reforms, including the liberalization and freedom of divorce, expanding parental leave, building kindergartens, and socializing domestic work, spreading what we view now as feminist ideas all across the globe to countries like China, Cuba, Vietnam, and Ethiopia before they ever really came to the US. Furthermore, she was very anti-war. She spoke out against the occupation of Finland and against World War I, and she worked to garner support for the Zimmerwald Conference against World War I, where, while she was very sick with lung problems and typhus, she delivered speeches at 123 meetings in 4 languages, including a U.S. tour. So, clearly, this woman is powerful, and she knew what she was doing. So finally, I wanted to include a little something just because I found that even though her views on marriage and sex were very, very important to her, they weren't really able to be fit into this presentation any other way. So to finish out the presentation, I just want to hit everybody with her views on marriage, family, and sex. Kollontai was very outspoken about her views on all of this. She wrote about her views on marriage and family in the 1909 pamphlet, The Social Basis of the Woman Question, in which she answered the question of what happens when women are the only people in charge of domestic work. So she saw the institutions of marriage and family as contributing to women's oppression. She noticed that being responsible for both working and the unpaid domestic work prevents them from being able to truly move on in society. By being so busy with their children, they're unable to take the opportunities as they come, which basically permanently keeps women at the bottom. This is something she recognized and that she tried to eradicate with actual legislation, but it was quite difficult for her. Next, she argued that sex was a natural instinct, which is honestly where most of her pariahness came from, because she argued that, like hunger or thirst, women have a natural inclination basically to be horny, and that there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, and we should not shame that. She also coupled economic independence and divorce together to show that if we are able to liberalize divorce, we'll actually be able to raise people up to get married out of love instead of out of economic incentives, which is what a lot of marriages were, and leads to things like domestic violence, emotional trauma, etc. Basically, Kollontai was extremely ahead of her time in all of these reasons because it's about 1910 when she published these beliefs, and so therefore she was very open and sure about herself in a way that most feminist icons of this time weren't. Here are my sources on the woman herself. I had such a great time making this presentation and learning about her. I had never heard of her before, but she truly is an incredible woman, and I really enjoyed learning about this. Thank you.